We are finally getting the absolute Justice League, and son. Let me tell you something, man. This comic, holy, okay. I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. Let's get into it, man, because it's phenomenal. It's absolutely amazing. So, what this does is this picks up in 1951 with Hawkman. The absolute universe Hawkman, right? And he says, "Gentlemen of the House of Un-American Activities Committee, you called me to this closed-door session to answer certain questions, and I've thought long and hard about the answers. During my covert work as the Hawkman, my true identity has remained my own secret. Now you say that I have to give that secret up. My face, my name, my life, I do consider these my own business, but sometimes business takes a backseat to pleasure. And you know what? It would be a real pleasure to inform on the commie rats nibbling away at this great country. What do you want to know, boys?" And so at that point, you jump forward to the present day and you pick up with Oliver Queen, the absolute Green Arrow. I didn't even know he existed. Son, it's amazing. Okay, so here's the thing, right? So Oliver Queen, he actually gets a call from Roy Harper. Now, it is a one-way conversation, right? He's talking about how he's doing well, that he's in the green, that he's hitting his targets, that he's down in the Arrow Cave practicing his craft, that he doesn't seem to be as perfectly accurate as his main DC counterpart, but still, he's accurate enough. But as this conversation goes further and further, we learn some important things. For example, we learn about a guy named Jabal Slade. Now, here's the thing. In the old Green Arrow, Green Lantern comics, right? Green Lantern Volume 2, issue number 76, Jabal Slade was introduced as essentially a slumlord, right? He's just a really, really crappy landlord. But things are completely different here in the absolute universe, because Oliver says, no, I told you about his island, right? All those private flights, and it's just kids, because he bought the cops, Roy. He's bought the courts. The system was built for guys like this. He's basically a Jeffrey Epstein stand-in in the absolute universe, which is kind of crazy. And that's where Oliver's like, I have to do something, right? Somebody has to do something. We can't let this whole thing go without anyone doing anything. And seemingly Roy Harper asked the question, why you? Because the response of Green Arrow is, why not me? Right? All this stuff that I have, this money, like what does it do? What do I do? Right? What are we actually doing here? Any of us? Because something is killing us all, right? Some moral cancer. It's rotting us from the inside out. It's rotting our souls. And where Roy kind of seems to tell him to calm down, his response is like, do not tell me to calm down. I mean it, right? You can be in or out, but I am serious. This way I can make a difference in the world. And he says, this is the direction I was always headed in. And so at that point, you leave Oliver Queen behind and you jump to Hector Hammond. Now, here's the thing. Hector Hammond is basically the main villain, for lack of a better word, from the Green Lantern comics. As most of you guys know from the main DC Green Lantern line, Hector Hammond has been a long-running villain of Hal Jordan. In the absolute universe, of course, he's not all screwed up through experiments the way he is in the DC universe, right? Gigantic head and a tiny body, but he is a corporate tycoon. And the idea is that he, alongside all the other villains from the absolute universe, are basically trying to weaponize superhero powers in order to gain themselves even more power. Because once you scale out and you kind of look at what's happening across the main absolute DC universe, it's essentially an arms race, right, for superpowered abilities. And the crazy thing is that Hector Hammond doesn't really take Oliver Queen seriously. In fact, he's talking to Jabal directly, right? And he's like, that's just the way that it goes, right? A guy turns 40, gets a gray hair, gets ideas. I bought a Maserati, Queen grew a conscience. It happens, right? But take a breath here. What can we actually do, right? What's his next move? And he says, sure, he talks big, sure, but it's Oliver Queen, right? He doesn't want results. He just wants to feel righteous. And nothing feels more righteous than losing. So get him around a table. This goes away in a month, like maybe $5 million, chump change, who knows? But just trust me here. I know this guy. Oliver Queen is never going to surprise anybody. And so that's when you find out that Hector is showing up here at a meeting, right? And that's the crazy thing, is the guy who's there at the door tells him, like, you can't have any electronic devices on you, right? No phones or anything like that. And so ultimately Hector hands his stuff over, but not without a bit of a fuss and threatening the guy with his job, right? But at the end of the day, when he gets into this room, it's all the villains in the Absolute universe, right? Absolute Ra's al Ghul, Absolute Dr. Thawne from the Absolute Flash comics. The Joker is here. Veronica Cale, who seems to be the kind of Absolute universe stand-in for Amanda Waller. And you guys will see what I'm talking about as we get further into this. But it's a great big huge unification of the villains. And that's what's kind of funny, is they all seem to be meeting each other for the very first time. But the reality is that their reputations precede them. Because as soon as Hector walks in, Veronica just says, hey, happy you could join us. I'm Veronica Cale, National Security Advisor. I'm the boss. Did you have something to say? And Hector Hammond just starts cracking jokes, right? He's like, if we're doing coffee orders, I'll take a macchiato. And right off the bat, Ra's al Ghul is like, no, right? This room is not for games. It is not for play. Speak of work or do not speak. And that's where Hector's like, who in the hell do you think you are, right? And Ra's just says like, I'm Ra's al Ghul. If you do not know what that means, be glad and be silent. Dude, it's one of the coldest lines that I've heard his character say in the Absolute universe. Dude, it's amazing. But it's where Hector's just kind of like, look, I was being rhetorical. I know who you are, right? And at that point, Dr. Thawne's like, I have to side with Mr. Al Ghul on this one, right? Our time is more valuable than any resource on Earth, Hammond. Far too precious to waste on your little jokes. And that's where Absolute Joker is like, agreed. I do not enjoy jokes. Now, Absolute Joker is going to have an amazing moment later on. It's one of the coolest aspects of his character that you get to see here. But you kind of get this just discussion point, right? The question being, why are we all here? What's the point of organizing this big powwow? And that's where Veronica Cale says, let's get started, right? She says, New York, 1939, chemist Wesley Dodds gets rich off his patents for improved anesthetic compounds. Soon after, a masked detective called the Sandman makes waves in the society pages, armed with a non-lethal sleep gas. Wesley Dodds is young, idealistic, romantic. It's not hard to put two and two together. Even before Dodds is found shot dead in his Sandman suit, his basement laboratory has been ransacked. A year later, the US military acquires some new and very lethal nerve gas weapons. Was that lethal gas brewed from Dodds' stolen notes? Ask the conspiracy theorists. Did it win us the war? Ask the historians. They will say yes. 1942, Gotham City. Ted Grant, a professional boxer, is framed for murder by small-time hoods. Grant's young. He's romantic. He puts on a cat costume, beats the hell out of them, and then clears his name. He calls himself the Wildcat. The neighborhood eats it up. So he busts some more small-time hoods, then medium-time hoods, working his way up. On a stakeout, he overhears a factory inspector taking a bribe from a munitions magnate to look the other way on safety standards. And then he comes into $50,000, tax-free, and that's the end of Wildcat. Grant buys a gym in Schenectady, trains a couple of champions, and dies peacefully in his sleep, aged 81. And here's the crazy thing, right? Veronica says 16 people die in workplace accidents in that factory over the next 5 years, making that gas, as I mentioned, the one that won us the war. So maybe taking the money was the most heroic thing that Wildcat ever did. And then she says 1951, Los Angeles, Iron Monroe, a movie stuntman and a real freak of nature. Rumor had it he could stop a bullet at 50 yards and outrun a locomotive. He decides he wants to fight a never-ending battle for truth and justice. The never-ending battle seems to involve a lot of social meetings. He's called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and it's done in a special closed-door session around the same time as a couple of other adventurers of the period. But Monroe refuses to name names. He calls McCarthy a demagogue, and that's the end of him. Within a year, he's living in a lonely shack in the Nevada desert, which is accidentally targeted for a chemical weapons test because someone filed the wrong paperwork apparently. Monroe's lungs were not as tough as the rest of him, but they were just as red. And she says 3 out of 100 examples throughout history, there have been individuals who acted outside the status quo, and the status quo has dealt with those individuals one way or another. Who remembers them now? And so it goes, and so it is always gone, until now. And she says the Gateway event, so called because it took place in Gateway City, and because it apparently opened the door to a whole new bag of craziness. That thing is called a tetracide. It was the second most dangerous creature to appear that day. This is the most dangerous, right? Absolute Wonder Woman. But the question is why, right? Why is Absolute Wonder Woman so incredibly dangerous? Well, Veronica says she arrived here from hell. She deafened a city. She became a Gorgon, turned the tetracide to stone, then destroyed it with one punch. She also, and this is the part that I find the most concerning, took operational command of the scene. Troops on the ground deferred to her. Based on what exactly? Her bearing, her tone, mind control? Why was she not arrested? At the same time, word spreads of another creature. This one is male, violently disrupting Lazarus Corps operations in Brazil, shrugging off artillery that would have blown a hole right through Iron Monroe, melting tanks with his eyes. Following which, a trained peacemaker agent ignores the Brainiac algorithm's recommendations and writes her after-action report directly in somewhat poetic detail. And so she says it's indicative of a trend. Gotham City, this one is human, at least we think, but he seems to redefine what human can be. He appears and vanishes like a ghost. He somehow built his resources into the city itself. He wears an axe blade on his chest, for Christ's sakes. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about Absolute Batman, and it's a very easy thing to forget, when she says that he builds the resources of the city into itself, Absolute Batman is a construction worker. He's not the billionaire Bruce Wayne that we're used to. So because he's always working on buildings, he can sneak little things that he needs into the city. So that's kind of how that works. But Joker comments and says he didn't take the money. And that's where Veronica says, yes, exactly, right? Unlike Ted Grant, he did not take the money. But what else? A vast alien object falls in the town of Evergreen, a second Gateway event, less telegenic this time, thank God. It helps that the object isn't around anymore. We know who the survivors of the event are, and they've been altered. Meanwhile, a military experiment at the Fort Fox base goes haywire. And again, there was at least one survivor who remains altered and on the run. And what other beings are out there? What forms do they take? Are they even corporeal? We don't know, and we cannot know, which is a very important statement because it shows no one knows about Martian Manhunter. Like Veronica Cale doesn't know, nobody else is aware. Now, we don't know if it's because of the fact that Martian Manhunter isn't really a physical, tangible form, and because of that, he just can't really be seen, that basically John is just kind of perceived as some crazy cop that mumbles to himself and flips out every so often, or if the Manhunter is shielding his identity from everybody, because we know he has vast telepathic and empathetic powers within the Absolute universe. But Veronica continues on. She says, but we do know that things are escalating. These new threats are far more dangerous than any before them, and the greatest danger they pose is not what they can do, but what they can convince others to do, what they can inspire. Peacemaker agents ignoring protocol, military officers taking orders from civilians, seasoned cops refusing to open fire on a man dressed as a bat. There is order in the world. There is a hierarchy. These things make a mockery of all of that. They could topple everything if allowed to. If we allow them to. Previously, we could all meet these threats individually. I no longer believe that's possible. You all have private resources, as do I. As National Security Advisor and Director of Area 41, I have additional government resources. But if we do not pull those together, if we do not work together, these monsters will take our world apart. And in the face of this entire speech, Hector Hammond is just like, no sale. No. He's like, I get it. Uncle Sam's hard up these days, so the begging bowl comes with a scare story. But nobody's scared, toots, because the point of that little speech was that people like us always handle people like them. And frankly, I don't need any help now. And that's where Ra's al Ghul just kind of chimes in and is like, I think you do. And where Hector kind of goes on in talking about how he's dealing with the Green Lantern and all that kind of stuff, that's not what Ra's al Ghul is talking about, right? Ra's al Ghul is like, I think now is a good time, Cale. She says, please send Mr. Hall in. And when Hawkman comes walking in, he's got the corpse of Oliver Queen having bashed his head in with a mallet, right? And he's just like, questions. Does anybody have any questions? And that's where Ra's al Ghul says, that is how we solve problems, Mr. Hammond. Not in a month, in a day. No sitting around the table, no chump change, no games, and no jokes. And so at that point, Dr. Thawne chimes in, right? And she's like, so I mean, was this like a murder or some kind of covert assassination? Is it some kind of a threat, blackmail? Like, what's the point, Cale? And Cale just simply says, call it a demonstration, right? What power can do for money and what money can do for power. How difficult is it for you to get intel on your little escaped experiment from Fort Fox, Elenore? How much effort did it take for Hammond to be the first on the scene and evergreen? How many millions? How many favors? But next time, and there will be a next time, you could each just make one phone call. At which point, Dr. Thawne just kind of says, unless Lazarus calls first. And then I suppose it's a bidding war. But frankly, I still agree with Hammond. And that's actually a fantastic point. Pitching this idea that if something goes on with Fort Fox and goes on with Absolute Flash, that, well, Elenore can just call up Veronica Cale and say, Veronica, I need a favor. But at the end of the day, the government's in the business of making money. And so at that point, Veronica Cale can just kind of be like, well, I mean, look, here's the thing though. Ra's just called up because he got to me before you did. So how much are you willing to pay for me to give you the resources you need to catch Absolute Flash instead of Ra's al Ghul? That's the concern that Elenore has here, right? But she says, as convenient as an alliance might be for you, I don't see the need to be in each other's pockets. It's not as if we're friends. And that's where Absolute Joker stands up and says, no, not friends. May I have the floor? And then he just says, thank you. And notice this, no one interrupts him. No one gets in the way of what Absolute Joker has to say. Now, here's the thing, right? And that's what's crazy about this, right? And it kind of works the same way in the main DC universe. When the Joker gets up and talks, people listen because they know that he would just kill them if for no other reason than inconveniencing him. So who knows what this Absolute Joker's like? And so he says, I'm going to share some recent research from a particle physics laboratory under my aegis. Needless to say, this is proprietary information. If any of what I'm about to tell you reaches any ears outside this room, I will take it seriously. And even Brainiac, who's watching through the glasses of Ra's al Ghul, just simply says, duly noted. Right? And so Joker continues on and he says, the Higgs boson is known in popular science as the God particle. It's considered by many to be the final piece of the puzzle of quantum mechanics, the one elementary particle that confirms how the universe works. And he says, they're wrong. Last year, we found a better one, the true end of the search. We call it the Omega particle. Studying it has revealed fundamental truths about the world we live in. The particle forms the basic building block of all creation, and now we know how it behaves, how it reacts, and what it reacts to. This particle, this energy, it has a spiritual dimension to it, a moral dimension. And that's where Thawne is like, you're telling us a subatomic particle understands good and evil. You cannot possibly be serious. And Ra's al Ghul immediately cuts her off and is like, no, he doesn't joke. He never jokes. Listen to what he's telling you. And so like Joker continues on and he says, the fundamental forces of the universe trend in one direction. And we know that includes societal forces. Gravity distorts the universe, and so the river runs, the curtain falls, the yoke is heavy. We accept that man is tethered to the earth. We do not believe a man can fly. With this discovery, we must now accept that there is likewise a moral gravity pulling down, keeping everything that is in its place. Existence is ordered and ordained. Water flows downhill. Those who have. Those who have not. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Some hold the winning cards, and some clutch a handful of jokers. This is not chance. This is not accident. This is design. The sore losers in the game of life see their fate woven into the fabric of creation and rail against it. They call it doom. There's a philosophical term for that perspective, the just world fallacy. And imagine being so twisted, so filled with hate, so paralyzed by fear. Imagine thinking that it's a fallacy, but the world is just. We have evidence, not of doom, but of natural order, worked upon the world by a higher power. If spoiled little anarchists like the late Mr. Queen here would stand against that order, I call that injustice. And injustice must be fought. Chaos must be fought. We must fight it. And how can we fail? God is on our side. So, are we friends? We are not. To claim friendship with any of you would insult you. To succumb to friendship is against the moral order. But we can be allies. Here, in this room, our watchtower, looking down from high above the herd, we can be in league. Between us, we can ensure the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. A toast, then, to an ordered world and to our Justice League. It's one of the most amazing speeches that I think I've ever heard in my entire life. Al Ewing, man, everything this guy touches turns to gold. Here's the crazy thing, though. Here's the crazy thing. That's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story, guys. It's not the end of the story. So here's what happens. At this point, you jump over to Brainiac, because keep in mind, Brainiac is viewing all of this through Ra's al Ghul's glasses. And he just says, fascinating data, right? Just fascinating. And without your methods, I'm not sure I could have acquired it. So thank you for that, Mirror Master, because that's the way in which they're able to see it, which is kind of cool. It would have been very easy for Al Ewing to just say, well, there's a little camera inside the glasses, and that's what, Brainiac is watching through. But to bring in Mirror Master, the absolute Mirror Master, that is dope. That's an awesome shift that I don't think any of us saw coming. But Mirror Master says, right, I didn't come here for thanks, Brainiac. I need your analysis. I need to know how it all connects here and in my mirror, how it connects and how it reflects. But at the end of the day, Brainiac just says, indeed, a measure of balance suits my own goals. Hammond balances Ra's and the Hawkman. Their egos can focus on one another, and Thawne's skepticism matches Veronica Cale, the true believer. But the man who doesn't joke, we need to reflect him, learn his secrets, and negate his threat. There is a name I recall from my glimpse into your mirror world, someone worth investing in. And I think for the Justice League to be complete, it needs one more member. And so at that point, you switch over to this final guy, right? You switch over to this final guy. It's amazing. So you switch over to this last guy, right? And he's just sitting there drinking tea, right? Sunset and green tea. It's a wonderful life, isn't it? Right? And this woman says, well, I certainly think so. And he says, it's strange. I was an angry young man, Dora, envious of others for their power, their popularity, even their looks. But right here, in this moment, I cannot think of a single thing that I want. And that's where she's like, can't you? Because the children are in bed, But like at that moment, his phone starts ringing and he's like, hold that thought. And where she kind of cracks a joke about how, it's always the phone and it's always the worst timing. He's like, no rest for the wicked, right? As they say, I'll just be a moment, darling. And so he answers the phone and he says, this is Lex Luthor speaking. How can I be of help? We are finally getting absolute Lex Luthor. I am so excited. I'm so excited, people. It's an exciting story. I told you guys, this comic is amazing. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you hit the sub button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.